Good afternoon, my highly regarded and esteemed CCP students. This is Mr. Brickwood, and we are talking about we're going to be talking about the Progressive Era, which comes on the heels of the Gilded Age. Historians, as I mentioned, they like things nice and neat and tidy, but really it all blends together. And the Progressive Era, by most accounts, starts around 1890, ends. You can make the argument it's still going on today. Some of the things that come about during the Progressive Era are still things we use today, and they carry over. So we look at Progressive Era. We're looking at this movement. We must understand first, we have already laid the foundations of the Gilded Age. It's the context of why the Progressive Era comes about. If you look at the Gilded Age, as we've talked about, the rampant corruption of the government officials, the exploitation of the workforce, whether that's child labor or the women in the factories or even the men in the factories, long hours, low wages, and very dangerous working conditions. There's no workman's compensation. If you're old aged in America, you need your family to take care of you. If you don't have a family, it could be a early death. So these are the things that are going on in America. We look at the Gilded Age. It's going to improve the technology or advance the technology in America, and we become the breadbasket of the world. And whether it's looking at agriculture or industry. The railroads, as we know, expand. Population soars in America with the immigrants coming in and population and birth rates rising. We have villages become towns and towns become large cities. We have skyscrapers. We have tenement houses. We got the rich right next to the poor. We have business and labor organizations clashing in cities and mining towns. It's a very tumultuous time in American history. The pendulum swings far to the right with the Gilded Age, with power in the hands of the owners. We have more money in America than ever at any point up to that point in history. And America is thriving and becoming one of the strongest economic powerhouses in the world. So we have this America who becomes this industrial, urban, capitalist society. We create this beast with the Gilded Age. And this is going to be, uncontrolled capitalism. This is laissez-faire at its finest. And, Adam Smith's, less is more when it comes to government. Well, that pendulum that swings all the way over there is going to have to swing back. And the Progressive Era is that kind of reactionary area. It's going to be the new way versus the old way. We're going to see where people actually are going to challenge this laissez-faire policy. We're going to see the Progressive Era be about, improving the lives, the social conditions, the economic conditions of Americans through political means. It's not a anti-radical capitalist movement. It's not a anarchy movement or a very strong socialist movement. It wants reform capitalism. It wants capitalism that's more fair, more just to the people. There's going to be a social justice movement, a social justice and industrial justice movement in America during this Progressive Era. And if we're to boil down the Progressive Era in 7, 8 different categories, we can look at the Progressive Era is really going to target, and they're going to want to use more government regulation. We learn with laissez-faire that the owners will exploit the people to maximize the dollar, that they want to get rich as possible, that with this money they're going to buy influence and power. We got to see this shift back. So they want to use government regulation to find ways to lessen the exploitation of children in the workforce, the exploitation of women in the workforce, the exploitation of workers in the workforce with the low wages. So the Progressive Era is really going to target that. They're going to target finding ways to help out those who are disabled, those who are old, those who get injured on a job with workman compensation. It's going to be one of the byproducts of the Progressive Era. They want cleaner food, they want regulations on food. They want the government to get involved in sanitation of food, making sure that the food that they're going to eat is not going to kill them. Not going to get sick. Again, laissez-faire is that libertarian. There's no rules. There were no rules. They want to push for ways to do that. They want to end local corruption, local, state levels primarily, even the federal levels as well. We'll see some examples of corruption with President Grant, for example. He wasn't involved personally, but his friends were with a whiskey ring. We see other examples in the 1800s where people are going to use. We see in the 1900s too, Harding gets exploited by his buddies as well. We see the progressive era really want to target monopolies. They want to target the trusts. They want to target those who are taking advantage of the consumer. So they're going to try to end that. You're going to see we know with the Gilded Age, it's all about efficiency and maximizing production. We're going to see pushback on that, where people are going to say, are we wasting all of our natural resources? We talked about moving out west in the Gilded Age and using those natural resources, or do we need to save some of these? So we see this growth of the conservation movement of wanting to preserve these areas, and we'll see that. So really, in a nutshell, we see the end of a push for laissez-faire. We see an end of this Spencer-type ideology of survival of the fittest, that those who are poor because they're not fit to survive. We see people challenging that here in the progressive era, saying, no, maybe it's just luck versus unluck. And this is kind of progressive era in a nutshell. And again, if you're going to label it, you're looking 1890s to the 1920s. And really, we see the New Deal that comes about. It's going to be a byproduct of the progressive era. So progressivism, again, it's going to target the economic and social factors, not so much political, but they're going to use political means to get their voice heard. One failing part that historians state that the progressive era failed, and we see this throughout American history, is with African Americans. It's not going to be very progressive for human rights, for black people in America. It's going to be more focused on those living in urban areas, the white people. But we will see women start finding more of a voice in the progressive era. So as I mentioned, bigger government, more regulation, end of laissez-faire. With all these people moving in the city, working in the city, into these working conditions, with the living arrangements as they are, we see the social sciences really take off at this time as well, and they kind of go hand in hand. Psychology and sociology start to grow and manifest themselves at this time, and people are studying, the impacts of industrialization on the workers. And we see this push to help clean up these areas, and we see personal hygiene become a bigger issue in these cities. Sanitation improving in these cities, construction of sewer systems, and this is going to be kind of the focus of this progressive movement of helping these people live better lives. And if we look at the Hull House, which was our first chapter of going to the source, that is during the progressive era as well, where you see these houses pop up to start helping these people. But really, the progressive era is more about getting the government more so involved. They want to push for that kind of change with the government. And, we have paintings come out that just kind of capture the power of the Industrial Revolution on the masses of the people. We can see here this picture where you see the factories in the background dwarfing the people on the ground, the workers who look tired, who look hot, who look maybe overworked. So we see the social sciences. They want to study this stuff. We have all these people moving in. Again, want to study these people, these immigrants. How can we help them? And this is really a progressive movement, and wanting to get involved to improve these people's lives. We got to look at a lot of people coming to America. The American dream is to be economically independent, being able to afford this new consumer market. We have all these new technologies. People want to be able to get their hands on them, so they want a higher living wage so they can afford these products. They can get some of the wants that they see out there. It's good for the economy too. These companies, they would ultimately like to see their customers have more money, consumers I should say, so they can buy their product. So we see this push for mass consumption in America, and it's going to go hand in hand with people wanting to get their hands on this stuff. We see during the progressive era, the labor movement is going to get more support. It's going to grow in numbers. It's going to grow in support from the middle class towards the working classes. And again, this is the progressive era. It's very revolutionary, a very exciting time in American history. And, it's going to be something that is going to set the stage for the things we have going on today. Now, the journalists and the photographers and the authors who are going to write about the working conditions being so horrible, the living conditions being so squalid, you're going to be called muckrakers. These guys are raking the muck. They're digging down. They're looking for stories. Sometimes they're going to embellish. Sometimes they're going to sensationalize. Oftentimes they will to sell newspapers, but the people reading this are going to be influenced by the media, by these muckrakers who are going to expose some of the ills of society, of living and working in this industrial life. And when they do, the middle class and the lower class reading this is going to jump on board, and some upper class members as well. They're going to look at this and say, man, we got to do something to help these people. The government should do something. And we can see books at the time. I'm not going to go through all these. Obviously, Wizard of Oz. This is looking at the Wicked Witches of the East. This is the focus, in the West is the focus. Those are owners of factories, and you kind of see a parallel. Everything's paved in gold. That's the American dream, and these things, or these books, are going to really focus on the exploitation of the worker. In some of them, it's going to focus on how there's going to be a civil war between the labor and the capitalist, the capital owners. That this is going to lead to problems between the two, which will break down American society, break down democracies. So books and authors, and the printing press is becoming more available at the time. More people have access to books. So because of that, we're going to see more middle class people reading. They got more leisure time, the middle class. So they're going to start reading this stuff. They're going to be influenced by these authors, by these stories in the paper, and they're going to push for change. One of the more famous ones on the left here is a guy by the name of Upton Sinclair. He writes about Chicago. He writes about the meatpacking plants, and he talks about how in the meatpacking plants there are going to be people who who are going to lose fingers in the meat, that rats are going to poop all over the meat, their dung, and this is going to be stuff that's just in the meat, and that the owners are going to leave out, the managers are going to leave out the poison to poison the rats. The rats will die, obviously, eating the poison, but then they'll fall inside the meat. So exposing stuff like this is going to really turn people's stomach, and they're like, man, we need to do something with this food safety. People would eat meat that was dyed, certain colored, and it was rotted. Especially lower class, and they'd eat it, and then they'd get sick, maybe die. So this stuff they want to get a cap on and get their hand on. So they want the government to get more regulation. And then we have the living conditions. Lewis Hine, he'll focus on the working class, working conditions, where Jacob Riis is going to focus more on the living conditions of the tenement house. And we can see here, and we're going to look at you guys are going to read an article I'm going to ask that you guys discuss. That's going to capture the pictures. We'll talk about Jacob Riis a little bit. But we can see people seeing this stuff, they want change, which will lead to the Meat Inspection Act being passed, or I should say Pure Food and Drug Act being passed, or Meat Inspection Act, 1906, where you're going to have to put what you have in your food on labels. And we're going to see on medicine as well. And again, these muckrakers are going to expose what's going on with the children, and this is going to lead to changes in laws being passed protecting children from having to work in these factories. And the first progressive president could be considered William McKinley. He does some things, but he's not usually considered. He does get assassinated. We'll look at that when we get into the next unit. Teddy Roosevelt, though, is really he's symbolic of the progressive era. He's somebody who really challenges these corrupt politicians. He challenges these bosses, and he's going to be the ones who actually label muckrakers. That's where he gets the term from, and they're always raking in the muck. And he's also, though, somebody who kind of, again, embodies the progressive movement, because he's not somebody who pushes for African American rights. He's somebody who he believes the Anglo-Saxon white American is the dominant race, and kind of similar to somebody like Adolf Hitler down the road. And I hate to, I'm not comparing him, just telling you the idea of the time. This is something that Teddy really believes. He's somebody who, psychology plays a role. He was somebody who was, as a child, was very weak. He was somebody who had asthma, and he's going to be a self-made man in some regards. He comes from a rich family, but self-made physically, imposing, and he's going to push for some of these progressive era changes. And we have Teddy Roosevelt, who's going to be somebody who has Abraham Lincoln as his favorite president of all time up to that point. And I thought this was cool, a little fascinating story. I'll put this on Google Classroom, a little backdrop. So here's a picture of Lincoln traveling through of New York, and a historian looked at this, and it just looks like the procession's going down. You can see the crowd of people. I found this fascinating. If you look up in this top window here, and the historian, what he realized was this house here belonged to Roosevelt's grandfather. And in this window, there's two young boys. And by some historians' accounts, that those two boys are Teddy and his brother, who are looking down at the funeral procession, which I found just fascinating. I thought that was super cool, so I wanted to share that. But Teddy Roosevelt, he's somebody who thrives on confrontation. He's not afraid of conflict, something that most people are, and he's going to believe that Congress is too corrupt, that there's too much power in the hands of the business owners. So he's going to push for finding ways to kind of curb that corruption at the local and state levels. And when he becomes president after McKinley gets shot, he is going to go after some of the conglomerates of the day. And one of those being J.P. Morgan. And he's going to break up one of J.P. Morgan's monopolies, which is a Northern Securities Company, and a railroad monopoly. And he's going to break up that trust, and he's going to say that it's not good for the consumers, it's not good for the workers, having somebody have all that power inside of the company. As a governor of New York, before he becomes president, he's going to pass laws that regulate sweatshops, that inspect slaughterhouses and factories. He's going to push for a workday of 8 hours. So he wanted to prevent, and the reason why he does it, he wants to prevent revolution. This is known as Teddy Roosevelt's square deal, that everybody gets a square deal, including the owners. The owners get a square deal, the consumers get a square deal, the workers get a square deal, and this is looking at the square deal of Teddy Roosevelt. And he believed that the federal government, or the government, has the power to do so. His most famous one was the United Mine Workers. They went on strike in 1902. The owners refused to meet with them, the union leaders, and there were complaints, and there were fears that the cities were running low on coal, or had no coal in the upcoming winter. And with the owners refusing to meet with the union reps, Teddy steps in, and he tells them, listen, you're going to sit and meet with these people, or I'm going to bring in the military. I'm going to declare this a national emergency. I'm going to take over the mines with the soldiers. So that's your option. Either meet with them or I take over. And, they claim that that violates the Constitution. He said, to hell with the Constitution, when the people want coal and when they need coal, because he knew that if they didn't have coal, there'd be revolution. So they ended up meeting with the union reps. They find an agreement, and this will be the first time federal troops don't side with the owners, really, coming in and shooting them. So Teddy Roosevelt will do that. But on the same token, as I mentioned, African Americans, he has Booker T. Washington visit the White House. And this will create a backlash in the white community. And this will be something you can see over here in the political cartoon on the right. You have Booker T. and Teddy meeting there, equality, the political cartoon plays. You got Abraham Lincoln in the background. And this is going to be something that the white backlash, they're going to say that blacks are going to need to put their place again in the South because of this. That this showing this that African Americans are equal to whites is going to create this backlash. So he's actually going to back down. He'll never have another African American in the White House again, or host another African American in the White House again. And there was another incident in Texas, the Brownsville riot, where African Americans were being targeted by bigotry and opened fire some soldiers, and he will side with the whites down there and dishonorably discharge all of the regiment, even though a few were only involved. But and some of those had been awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor in Cuba, who had fought near him. Teddy will also represent the progressive movement by the fact that conservation's big. He's going to push for conservation. He was somebody who actually sadly lost his wife and his mother within the same 24-hour period, and that's going to be something that forces him out to live in the Dakotas. He'll live out there, he'll live on the land. So he's big with nature, he's big with conservation, and with the Industrial Revolution, the Gilded Age, exploiting all that, he's going to reserve a lot of land to protect from the poachers and protect those natural resources. 234 million acres. That will actually expand over time with Taft as well. Now, progressive movement, progressive era. This is a time period where we live in a patriarchal society where the rule of thumb, that saying comes from the fact that you could actually, as a male, beat your wife with a ruler no wider than a thumb in certain places. That was a rule of thumb. And you You can do that legally. So we see that women in this patriarchal society got to find their voice. Well, with the fact that they're moving into the workforce, this is going to change some things because women, who are moving in the workforce, are going to find ways to realize that they have a personality. They're going to build their confidence. They get a persona, which is Latin for theatrical mask. Man, they get this persona in these places. They get empowered and they get organized and they get economic incentives for working there. Now, as we talked about Jane Addams with the Hull House, who helps found it with Ellen Starr, and this is a time in a patriarchal society where women, whenever they get educated, they usually don't have a job waiting for them, so they have to find a way to do something, and we all want to have a purpose in life. So Jane Addams finds her purpose. She's the first woman to win the Nobel Prize, and she's going to set the Hull House, social workers for these poor, and she wants to find ways to give them the skills to survive in America. And these places provide, health clinics. They provide nurseries for working mothers to help watch the babies, gymnasiums, job training. They have classes over art history and, how to speak and all these different things. So this is Hull House. And again, these middle-class women are going to try to do right by these people. But again, they need more federal protection and government. But with women doing that, being out there, they're going to get more visibility. And this will set them up for becoming way more visible by the 1920s. We'll see some of those societal expectations change over time, the traditional gender roles. And we see that the women, and you can see over here the return from toil, this drawing from John Sloan, and it depicts women as independent-minded, stylish, and self-confident, standing taller because of the progressive era than they did before. Feminism is the first appeared in the vocabulary. Now, with them getting organized, you're going to see this temperance movement grow. Carrie Nation, she went around just throwing hatchets and rocks and stuff and attacking the saloons. And we see this temperance movement, which temperance actually means in moderation, but we're going to see it transform over to the prohibition movement. And women will be kind of at the forefront of this. And they want to reduce alcohol consumption. Owners don't mind this at the time either, this temperance, because a lot of their workers who come in hungover are going to be not as productive. So they're okay with it too. And you're going to see women really push to improve family life, to end violence, to end crime on the streets, and to stop corruption on election day, which politicians would give free beer out if you voted for them on election days. So they think, prohibition, 18th Amendment. This goes back to the snakes in India kind of thing. They think it's so good, but it's going to have a cause and effect that it's going to be probably bigger negatives than positives from prohibition, and we kind of learn that. But again, moral of the story: women get to the workforce, they get organized, they get empowered, they get confidence, and they're going to get their voice heard. And it's going to lead to the suffragist movement as well, women's suffrage, the right to vote, and this is going to be the first state to do that, Wyoming. And this goes back to, again, the fact that women aren't out there in the great numbers. For every one female, there's 9 males. So trying to get more females out there for the male population. And they thought maybe giving women the right to vote would do that. And this is something we'll watch in class, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. This kind of just highlights of why we need reform, capitalist reform. We see, sadly, a number of women leaping to their death from this fire. And we'll talk about it. Now, Teddy Roosevelt, he will step down, and he's going to allow his buddies, and be very vocal, allow his buddy to come into the White House. You can see this, I don't know who this guy in the background is, kind of creeping there. But his buddy, William Howard Taft, and he's going to support him to get it. He becomes President Taft, and then we immediately see TR. I think it was more of a psychology. I think he was jealous. Sometimes we're envious of our friends. I think he wishes that he would never have stepped down, that he would have ran another term. But he chooses not to, and Taft steps in, who's going to support women's right to vote and workers' right to join unions. And he will actually lead to a lot more conservation. He will break up a lot of trusts. He'll break up the Standard Oil monopoly, which is out of Cleveland, with Rockefeller. So we see Taft run. And then we have the 1912 election, which was probably one of the most exciting elections in American history. As I told you, that TR and Taft kind of have a falling out. The Republican Party is going to nominate Taft, And this is going to be something that will sorry, I lost train of thought here. So they're going to nominate Taft, where Wilson will be nominated by the Democrats, and Teddy's going to run his own party. It's called the Bull Moose Party, the Progressive Party, he calls it. And then the other guy, I think, it's kind of, when I read about him, it's almost the first Bernie Sanders. You come across him with the Pullman strike, Eugene Debs, who's a very likable figure, who's a strong socialist of the day. And we see the 1912 election. It's going to be between these four men, and we're going to see, because Roosevelt runs the Progressive Party and Taft runs, that they're going to just divide each other's votes, split each other's votes, which allows Woodrow Wilson to take power. He will be considered still a progressive president. You know, he's one of those guys. I'm not a big Woodrow Wilson fan overall because of his racial views. Very strong bigot, very, very big racist, and he walked in a room. He was the smartest person in it. Just ask him. Very pretentious guy, and he was the president of Yale or Princeton. I'm sorry, president of Princeton, and he's somebody who walks in a room and he believes he has this instinct for leadership. And you know, when he wins the election, he tells his campaign manager, "It wasn't you that helped me do this; it's God. It was divine. That I got this post." So, but he speaks, and he's the first president to be on the radio, and he's a good speaker by many accounts. I don't know. It's you know, we look back and I hear people say they're good speakers, and you listen to them speak, kind of underwhelmed. But you know, he's a wordsmith. He likes to use descriptive wording, which is definitely an advantage. But he maybe sometimes uses too big of words, and many people are kind of turned off by him. And he's not very good at building relationships because, again, he thinks he knows how to do things the right way. Anyhow, he's also the first president since the Civil War who's going to openly endorse discrimination. And he's somebody who's lived in the South during Reconstruction, during the Civil War. So his views growing up down there are going to be that whites are superior to blacks. And he could not stand hearing women speak in public either. Now, he is going to help pass some laws, though. You got the workman's compensation. We have child labor laws passed. When we have the 16th Amendment, which is going to lead to taxing income tax, a progressive income tax. The wealthier you are, the more you get taxed. This doesn't really impact a lot of the population because they actually make less than $3,000 annually. So we have these reforms. The 17th Amendment is going to allow for direct election of U.S. senators. Instead of being picked by the party, now you're going to have direct election of them. And this will get rid of some of the graft, some of the political corruption. And this is really what the Progressive Party brings to America. And at Wilson's term, he's at the height of progressivism, and we see a push towards that. And we see them challenging, again, the corruption and those 7 things I mentioned: the child and women exploitation, the workforce exploitation of workers, really, the age-old, old age, trying to help those people with Social Security, and illnesses. Now, Social Security won't come around until a little bit later, but again, sets the ground for it. Sanitation of food, local corruption, conservation movements, end of monopoly and trust, and help consumers, and more government regulation, end of laissez-faire, and that social justice of helping the people out in the workplaces and in living conditions. And really, that's progressive era in a nutshell. And again, it sets the conditions. And again, most historians want to make it nice and neat, but the New Deal, which is considered very revolutionary in the 1930s, with government getting really involved, is really just a byproduct of the Gilded Age. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got something out of it more so than enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed a little bit. With that, you guys have a fantastic day. Namaste.